I would like to welcome and thank Mrs. Charlotte Elliott for taking the time to talk to us today about our COVID conundrums. Charlotte is an executive educational leader and social entrepreneur who partners with a range of organisations to support startup growth and change management, a true driver of sustainable change in society. Just as a background to Charlotte, she led the first Trust the Trust Academy merger in the UK. She's also led on strategic projects such as narrowing the gap for the Buckinghamshire Learning Trust. Charlotte was recruited by Buckingham University to lecture and support on the first cohort of educational leaders to obtain their masters in educational leadership under the apprenticeship levy, a UK first. She holds a BA Honours in acting from a top drama school in London and a PE from Nottingham Trent University. A future leader since 2010, she was also recruited by the DfE as one of their first talented leaders at the same time as completing her Executive Educators Chief Executive Programme. So quite a resume there. Today, Charlotte is the CEO and founder of Affinity 2020 CIC, which is a community interest company, and it cares for children in care and care leavers. Normally I start this by asking how you've done during lockdown, but I do know that you've been running a live 20-week workshop, and you've also been working on solace semi-independent living for people with mental health and addiction barriers. How have you managed that during lockdown?
It's been a really interesting journey for me, and I think what has helped me is because I've worked in crisis situations for the last 10 years, working in schools in challenging circumstances. For me, when COVID hit, it was like my body automatically, physically kicked into the mode that it does before I enter a special measures school or a special measures trust. And my mental health also adjusts itself. So I suppose in a way my body is conditioned to crisis. So I haven't really felt the jerk, the anxiety, the worry, etc., that a lot of people had. I think the main concerns that I've had through COVID is people's worries about me. The fact that I'm classified as a key worker, the fact that I'm working with patients that are coming off wards, mental health barriers into our provision, that's been the challenge for me, is actually managing my family and their worries and concerns, and also managing my friends' worries and concerns about me catching it, or, the fact that I'm unsafe. So I've had to do an awful lot of enhanced communication with them. I'm okay, it's fine. I phone my sister and my mum at least twice a day because, just to settle their anxieties down, that, I am symptom free and I'm fine. And I think that's been the biggest shift, because normally when I go into a crisis situation, I don't have to have that level of communication with my family and friends because they just accept that's what I do. But this has been obviously very, very different because it's a virus and it's an unseen virus. And I think there's a huge amount of anxiety from people because it's unknown. We just don't know how it transfers or why some people are getting ill and some people aren't. So that's how I think I've managed it. Fill your plate up while everyone else is sitting at home worrying. But just going back to managing friends and family, and I know from talking to heads and people I know and people who work with me in my networks, lots have struggled with mental health issues at home, and I'm just talking about your normal everyday people. Yeah. So how has this affected those that are most vulnerable, those in care? I mean, because they don't always speak out. How's that had an effect on their mental health? I think some of the young people that we're working with, the issues that they have is their the connectivity. So the connectivity that school gives them around their peers and other adults. So they are in effect isolating themselves, because not only are they not around near their peers, they're actually having to have a different kind of conversation with their biological parents too. Many would see them. Also, I was saying the other day to someone, one of the biggest issues is some of the foster carers are shielding themselves. They are older. So not only are these young people isolated in a school context, they're isolated from the biological families. Some of them are actually fully isolated because their foster carers can't leave the house. So the general exercise and the walking and all those things that people are now allowed to do, in some cases foster carers can't do that, and therefore foster children don't get access to that. I think there's a bit of a misconception that foster parents are all young and youthful. And it's just not the case. We have some absolutely fantastic maturer foster carers, and I think sometimes there's a bit of a lack of understanding around those foster carers' needs as well as the young people that they are living with and bringing up.
Yeah, it sounds a very difficult kind of balancing act to make sure that everybody's being cared for when everybody is needing some form of attention. And do you see post-COVID and post-lockdown, when you can get back to normal, and we're seeing reports that it's the young that are going to be the hardest hit for jobs, apprenticeships, and they generally are when we come out of recessions, but this might be slightly different. How are, with the most vulnerable, how are we going to get this social capital working again? Because it's that into action that actually builds us as individuals, which they probably struggle with the most. What's going to be key to getting that working again?
But one of the things that we're already working on, we are future proofing the organisation and actually looking at what the landscape looks like and how we can support children. So we have put in about 3 or 4 different grant streams at the moment to do some R&D around aspirational work, the work that's in our locality. You know, Sheffield City region is a booming region, and it's got lots and lots of businesses in all different kind of areas, but a lot of the young people don't know they're there. You know, when you talk about engineering and manufacturing, a lot of the young people think, oh, that's just building engines. So we're just at the moment going into a partnership with an organisation called Workwise to look at how we can work together to actually share with the young people about apprenticeships, about the world of work locally to us, because, you know, a lot of children may not be able to travel, how we can access university through employment. So they've got a real good understanding of the world of work out there and what a 21st century job looks like, rather than in a lot of cases with children that are in care is kind of gender specific roles. So a lot of young people will automatically make the choice to go down hair and beauty, and a lot of the boys will talk about getting their buildings card so they can go on building sites. So we're doing a massive piece of work around that. The other thing that we're looking at is risk adversity. What me and my colleagues have been discussing is we possibly are going to have a generation of young people that are risk averse. So what that means is a lack of innovation in this generation, a lack of risk taking, a lack of developing businesses, being entrepreneurs themselves, because they will look for a place of safety. And if work is not done with this generation, they may live in a state of anxiety and fear and being risk averse, creating not only issues with the recession and the jobs, but also then the capabilities of these young people to enter into the new world of work and what that looks like, because those key skills are what we need as we move forward, especially around risk and appropriate risks, because everybody in business takes appropriate risk. If we've got a generation that can't do that, where does that leave our industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, besides my Realise Me platform, a social enterprise itself, I chair a network of about 300 CEOs, which probably equates to about 9,000 staff. And many of those are quite young. And it is quite different how there's a lot more of the blame game. It's the government should do this for me, and people not really taking responsibility and accountability. And talking to several heads recently, seeing COVID as a catalyst for change post-COVID, what could you do materially to change education? And it's been more around the making a rounded individual. It's not just scores on doors and rote learning for tests. And I suppose a question for you is, I met you many years ago when you were an executive leader at the AET, and again at Buckinghamshire Learning Trust, and then bumped into you not so long ago at a national education conference. And they were all school settings. And did you feel that you needed to use all that educational experience and move it into more of this looking after the most vulnerable and those who needed those skills and expertise the most?
I would say it's a set of skills that I developed in education, but not necessarily porting education over. because we do a lot of research and development, R&D, which is, every program that we run is based in a big, wide kind of varied view of R&D from around the world, or things that we've developed and co-produced with young people. That's an element of education that's not there. Mm-hmm. We talk about research and development, and we talk about, what that looks like and how we trial that. But is that really true R&D? Not really. I'll be honest, it's not. And I think the other major thing is around change management. My change management skills have obviously been enhanced throughout working in education, and particularly the settings that I've worked in. So I've been able to apply that change management work that I do into other settings, and not, again, be tainted by what that looks like in education. Because I've done a lot of studies at an executive level, I've actually studied business and how business operates rather than studying how education operates. I sometimes feel that we can learn as educationalists so much from business that we don't necessarily choose to. We choose to say, well, this is education though. And I think we've got a lot to learn moving forward from business, because we've seen some organisations absolutely pivot through COVID. Absolutely. I mean, one of the organisations that I know about, Rejuvenate, for example, they're a supplements-based company and they're a worldwide based company. They had to change their business plan in less than 48 hours to survive, and they did. And they have now beyond succeeded with what their targets were through having this flexibility and this ability to shift rapidly and actually not look at, what I can't do, or that might be my barrier. They've gone, well, we have to do this with both. We have to jump in and get this done, and we have to innovate around this. So I think within the education setting, I'm hoping that leaders will really start to look at deep innovation and really looking about what we need to do with young people moving forward. And I do understand that they've got accountability measures with Ofsted and the Department of Education. But, get into those conversations with these arms, these accountability kind of aspects of education, and say, this is unprecedented. We've got the new coming through. And let's be honest, your framework's the old now. So we need to get back to the drawing table together and actually come up with something that is going to make sure that this generation are as successful as previous generations.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that's quite a task, because I think coming off the back of this, the education gap's going to be hard. That's going to affect social mobility. Yeah. And going back to business, I totally concur and agree with you in terms of sometimes with schools or education, it can almost feel an adversarial relationship with business, a necessary evil. We're not preparing them for that, and that content of information and knowledge they've accrued during their time at school can be seen as quite useless. They have to be retrained and repurposed for that environment. So it sounds like maybe education itself needs a few more mavericks to break down these barriers. I've met loads in education, just need more. Yes. Self being one of them. What post-COVID, what can schools and social services and other public sector bodies do to help and work with people like Affinity 2020?
We've been really lucky because we have a great partnership network. So we have a fantastic relationship with Rotherham Council. And what we found through this process is that the head of the looked after council, Lisa Duval, has been absolutely amazing. So she has helped us with all the building of the project, getting it online. She's acted as the conduit for contacting the children, because obviously we can't have their details because of GDPR and sensitivities. So we've had a brilliant piece of partnership work with her. I've also been talking a lot with Sharon Sandel, who's the head of the care leavers in Rotherham, and what our future work looks like. So actually within the public sector, we have had lots of great partnerships spring up and joint working and looking at things in a different way. So, for example, we know now, I have directors' meetings, I have accountability, and we found because we're doing it on Zoom and it's 6:00 at night and we've had a tea and we're all relaxed and we've not been at work since 7:30, the productivity of that meeting is so much better. Mm-hmm. So there's things like that I think we need to look at, is about meeting structures and bureaucracy, and how can that be done differently, because it's had to be done differently currently. A good example, a friend of mine works in a mental health hospital, and she said they used to have like a 2-hour bed meeting. She said, now I send where the beds are in my ward via an email, and it's done in 20, 30 seconds. She did the same with the consultant round. She said, we used to go around with the consultant while the consultant would explain. Actually, that's done now with the consultant, and everybody else is logged in via Zoom or Skype watching that happen. And again, it takes 30 minutes rather than a morning. So I think we need to not forget about some of the things that we've trialled in the public arena and not revert back to what we're comfortable with, and actually continue to push with these areas and these innovations that we've had to do in a way. I suppose it's forced us to change.
Mm-hmm. Which is a good thing. I see a lot of the, not embracing, especially in education, not embracing new technologies which can save time. Yes. We did a time audit with our platform and showed that we were saving about 3.5 hours a week for a secondary school going into and back and forth from their MIS systems. Mm-hmm. That's 2 months a year. If you're just working on 36.5 hours per week. And the acknowledgement that actually outcomes are good. And this is where I think the bureaucrats spoil things, is because they're only interested in process, mm-hmm. not in outcome. And it does need those kind of mavericks to push on that. Otherwise, they just settle back into the inertia that was there before. Mm-hmm. And going with that, so it sounds like you've made a huge amount of headway in a very short period of time. And on that pathway to success for Affinity 2020, is that something you're going to take into other authorities or across the country? How does that work over the next few years for you?
So Affinity was set up to support young people in Rotherham because of what we've been through in Rotherham. I mean, we all know what happened with the press and the troubles that we've had. So it was a direct result of, let's do something about young people that are in care. If you're in care in Rotherham, you've got a 70% chance of being neat. Our statistics around children in care are really high. And this is not because the local authority or people that work in the local authority, because they're superb. It's just, it happens in every local authority. So we're going to continue to work closely with Rotherham. We also do a lot of consultancy. So I'm obviously working with Solace Living at the moment, building their semi-independent living. So we work that side of the world as well within mental health. We also develop events online. So we're about to go live with our first foster care conference, which is about not confusing trauma with need. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the time people will come across young people in care and go, oh, it's trauma. Well, actually, no, it's a need. And we need to explore this further, and we can't have this big, it's trauma masking actually a special educational need. So as we move forward, I'm seeing the business is bending and flexing around need. So I would say we're a need-based empowerment organisation. Mm-hmm. So this week again, one of the young people that we're working with, his absolute goal is to be a police officer, and he's been talking about it for years and didn't really know how to get there. So I called one of my colleagues, who's the Chief Inspector of South Yorkshire Police, who then had a Zoom call with him and talked to him about his pathway, the cadets. And he also said, you have my email now. I'd like you to keep in contact with me. Let's see whether we can get this going. So Affinity is also around how we can move children forward into their jobs of choice and get that kind of mentoring early on in place with people that are actually doing those roles too. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that will also have an impact around our NEET statistics in Rotherham.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for NEET, I was involved in a startup charity a few years ago that was, the funding just came from recruitment companies, and I was the voluntary chair of that organisation. And what we were doing, we were working with the NEETs, but it was giving them a buddy, someone they could speak to on the phone, because a lot of it's confidence. Yes. And finding somebody to just say, look, what does that mean? And actually knowing in a hierarchy of a business that they're still people. They're not someone to be frightened of or scared of. They're just a human being like you. And it's a really big bridge to cross. But once they've gone, mm-hmm. it's quite easy. I look back and see, what was the problem before? What can, I suppose, as a final question, what can we do outside and everybody and businesses to help organisations such as yourself to help these youngsters, these NEETs in need, to find their way in life?
I think one of the biggest things is when a director position comes up in a charity or a CIC, that if their business leaders feel they have the time and the capacity to join that board, because their expertise, like for me, for example, my board, I've got a shadow director who is so well networked across Rotherham when it comes to employment, education and training, who advises us. We are looking to develop our board in that particular area so we can use the board as an advisory tool, because we only know what we know as the directors as they are. And I would advise business leaders, if they can, if there is that opportunity, to start to join boards to help shape those networks, those connections, that drive towards how we support young people moving forward into a world where there may not be jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be a tough one.
It is going to be a tough one. I mean, I was talking the other day about, we've just been successful with getting a grant to develop entrepreneurial skills in care leavers and setting up their own businesses and what it looks like to set up your own business, because there needs to be a bigger focus around this, because there may not be the jobs for life that everybody kind of relies on now. And we may have a landscape moving forward of lots of self-employed people, lots of directors of companies starting to spring up, so they're actually self-supportive. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we're a nation of shopkeepers or business owners, and I think it got us through the last recession. Mm-hmm. It's going to be difficult after this, I think, because of the furloughing schemes and how that's impacted. I know personally where we've helped hundreds of supply teachers where they've fallen through the gaps, where you're self-employed and you're not protected during these times. And I hope that doesn't lead to a drop off in those having those aspirations to start their own businesses as well. Yeah. Do you think that's going to have an effect on this kind of adversity to risk, in that, you know, we're going to see unemployment, we're seeing people who aren't supported by government schemes. Do you think that's just going to augment that issue?
Yeah, that's why I think there needs to be a bigger piece of work done with young people, because the environment will kind of, in a way, institutionalise them to being risk adverse straight away. It'll just be like, get a job, find something that's safe. This happened to your mom, this happened to your nan, this happened to your Uncle David. And, you know, there's going to be that level of fear and anxiety from adults for their children. So, and we have to start to work through this together somehow, or we will have what is called a workforce of people that are looking to be employed. Yeah. Which then when you talk about our innovations in the UK and our industry and actually some of the areas that we do lead on. I mean, you know, we've got up here Boeing and McLaren, and, you know, that kind of innovation will stop. And those massive kind of, like, just take Boeing, for example. I know that they've just gone to CTI to have a bespoke piece of the aeroplane made, and that has actually been developed by a group of people problem solving around how this component didn't work before and how it works again. But then we could end up with a generation of children going, but it works, so it's fine.
Yeah, it's scary, but it's a huge task as well. And I think I was talking to an education leader a few days ago and saying, actually, it's one of those points where you might see lots more interest in becoming a teacher because it's seen as a secure, safe place to be. But is that the right reason to take that job? Do you want a generation of teachers who just wanted it because it's a safe job, rather than, as you know and I know, the teachers that want to be teachers and see it as a vocation? And do you think that's going to see a swell in the public sector?
I think so. And I think, like I say, with the last recession, we saw that also. We saw bigger government, didn't we? We saw bigger government and we saw bigger public sector. And I think, yeah, there will be, I think, certain shortage areas like social workers, nurses that have bursaries. I think there will be a lot of parents, grandparents, you know, foster carers, etc., moving children into that direction out of fear themselves. So there's also work, I think, that needs to be done with parents, foster parents, carers, etc., about, you know, making sure that the young person is actually still heading towards their dreams and their goals, and they're not feeling like they have to do something. Because we all know mental health stems from the fact that you don't have control over your own life. Yeah. If you don't have control over your own life, then you end up with mental health issues. So we could have a generation of young people who feel disempowered to take control over their own life, leading to, like say, anxiety, depression, all those key things that we don't want people to experience at any point in their lives.
Yeah, it's tough. And I know I've got 3 children, and with what goes on social media at the moment, it makes them anxious anyway. And I think we've got to work out how we teach children to decipher that information, understand that it's not all true. Yes. And it's there to be emotive, and it's there to get you to think a certain way, and not to be pulled from pillar to post by different opinions. Is that something you're finding with those you're dealing with, that social media is such a massive influence on their mindset?
Absolutely huge. And how, like you say, having the skills to actually work through what is fact and what is not fact, or actually researching further and deeper into what they're reading, because the generation themselves at the moment are very instant. Everything's instant. Mm-hmm. So they don't necessarily have that skill set to kind of go deeper, look deeper, be more consistent in what they're looking at. It's there and it's gone. So I think there needs to be a lot of work done with the generation around that, and also what they post as well.
Right.
I think peers can have impact on peers. I mean, I see some young people posting things that they're depressed and they're anxious, and then their peers then are going to support mode, and then they're worried about them. And, you know, you end up with this kind of big ball of young people that are all worried about one another, and they don't actually quite know how to get out of that.
Yeah.
Or how to support with that, or, you know, what does resilience look like? You know, resilience doesn't look like you're big hard and you just crack on. You know, there's different components of resilience, and how we develop that in young people moving forward, I think, is incredibly important.
Yeah, it's look, I'd just like to say thank you for, you know, that's, as always. Your aspirations are inspirational, and the work you're doing is fantastic. This video will obviously go out, but it also go to a network of CEOs, and I hope all of those listening and watching will get in contact with, if they're local to Affinity or others, and see if we can all do something to help society ourselves. But once again, Charlotte, I'd just like to say very much thank you for being on COVID Conundrums today.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.